Thank you for watching today. We are studying First Timothy chapter 3. First Timothy chapter 3. So let's go ahead and turn to that. I'm reading from the New King James Version of the Bible, and it reads, "This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work." In this chapter, we're going to talk about uh, what's here called bishops, or we're going to see that we could probably call them overseers or elders, and we're also going to talk about deacons. These are the two offices of the first century church. Later, Paul's going to talk about the church being the house of God, or the pillar of truth. And I think that there's definitely a connection here. House can mean household, kind of the same way like it can in English. And the idea here is we need to make sure that our leadership is right because they're taking care of God's household, and this is extremely important. So, for example, one of the qualifications is they have to be able to take care of their own house, meaning their family, their household. Um, as a prerequisite for taking care of God's household. If you can't take care of your own household, how can you be expected to take care of God's household? If you're not faithful in small things, we're not going to give you big responsibilities. There's essentially two words that can mean elders or overseers. The first one is a word called presbyteros, and it's found in Acts 20:17. This Greek word presbyteros, means elders. It can also, but it can mean the office of elder, but it can also just mean like an old person. And this is the same idea that we see in so many different words in the New Testament in Koine Greek. Like, for example, we've talked before about apostle. Apostle can mean the office of apostle, meaning like the 12 apostles and Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, or it can just mean someone sent out. So Barnabas is called an apostle, but he doesn't have the office of apostle. So the terminology can be used in an office sense or a general sense. And we're going to see that same thing with elders and with deacons as well. So this first word that can mean elders is presbyteros. It's not the word found here in um, 1 Timothy 3. It can possibly sometimes include both the overseers, which is seen here, and the deacons, but it seems like most of the time it's synonymous with this other term, which is used here in 1 Timothy 3, which is episkopos. And episkopos in the New King James Version is translated as bishop, but in a lot of modern English translations, it's translated as overseer. But we see, like in Acts chapter 20, Paul is talking to the elders in the church of Ephesus. Interestingly, the same church that Paul is dealing with here, that he's had to send Timothy to. He's talking to the elders in the church, and he says to them that God has made you overseers. He also, interestingly enough, tells them to shepherd the flock. So that brings in another word of church leadership, and that is pastor. So presbyteros means elder, can mean the office of elder, can also mean just an old person. Episkopos is overseer, probably synonymous with elders. And then there's another word, pastor, which is found in the book of Ephesians. So a lot of these things are really um, connected to the church of Ephesus. But in that list where pastor is mentioned, the only place in the New Testament is in Ephesians. Paul is talking about spiritual gifts. So in the only time that pastor is used in the New Testament, it is not used as an office. It is used as a spiritual gift, and it's connected to teacher. It's like the pastor teacher gift, the spiritual gift, which is a very important spiritual gift. Of course, we need people to be able to teach the word and to preach the word, and to pastor the flock. And it is not used as an office. It's used as a spiritual gift. But apparently, the elders or overseers are also pastors. Okay. They may not necessarily have the gift of pastoring. If they don't have the spiritual gift of pastoring, they're going to have to learn how to pastor, how to shepherd the flock. It would definitely be preferable for someone to be, for an elder to have the spiritual gift of pastoring, or at least be they're at least going to have to be apt to teach. Okay, so if you're looking for elders for your church, the best thing to do is get people who are going to fit these qualifications and also be have the spiritual gift of pastoring. Um, but it is, if you can't find people who have the spiritual gift of pastoring, they still need to fit these qualifications, and it's going to include teaching. And this is going to be the major difference between the office of elder or overseer and the office of deacon. Deacon means simply a server, but it can also, the Greek word diakonos, but it can also refer to the office of deacon. But even Jesus is called a deacon. Paul is called a deacon. I mean, we're all called to be servers in the general sense, but we're probably not all going to end up being, or we're definitely not all going to end up being deacons in the official office of deacons. So all these different words, kind of review that again. Apostle refers to the office of apostle, and we don't have those today. It's the 12 and Paul, but it can also just mean someone sent out. Elder can potentially refer to um, all the oversight, which is going to include overseers and deacons, but we can't be fully sure of that based on the textual evidence. It's definitely sometimes used in distinction to deacons and synonymous with overseers. Okay, elders is presbyteros. It 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 can mean the office of elder, or it can just mean an older person. Then overseers is episkopos, and that's our word in this passage. That's distinct from deacon. But and deacon means server, and we should all want to be servers. We should all want to be deacons in the general sense. Uh, and probably would be a good thing to want to be a deacon in the specific sense as well. Okay, so let's go back to Acts chapter 3, verse 1. This is a faithful saying: if a man desires the position of a bishop or elder or overseer or pastor for that matter, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. Pause there for just a second, kind of go over some of these things. Blameless. Why would we want an elder to be blameless? I sometimes hear people talk about, well, what does it matter what people think? What does it matter what the outside world thinks of the church? Well, turns out it actually does matter. We don't want someone who's been seen in compromising positions, even if that person was completely innocent. We still don't want that person to be an elder in the church because of how things look. How things look, it turns out it does matter. husband of one wife. This word or this terminology here is one that's definitely been debated, but my understanding is that this is a one wife kind of person. We see in the Greco-Roman world sometimes they talk about a one man kind of a woman. This is the type of woman that is of good repute and the type of woman you'd probably want for a wife, the type of woman that you're happy to have as your wife is someone who's not gonna run around on you. Okay. So this is the kind of person we want as an elder, a one woman kind of a man. And yes, it does have to be a man. We're not gonna have if we're looking at this biblically, we're not going to have women elders or women overseers. And we saw that you can look at the last chapter. Paul already talked about um, women are not to have authority over men. So if a woman was to be an elder, then they would be having authority over a man. If the distinction between elder and deacon, the main distinction is teaching um, and or preaching, then that would be a woman teaching men, and that's something Paul already said he doesn't allow in the last chapter. So yes, an elder needs to be a one woman kind of man, which requires that he's going to have to be a man. And it's got to be someone who is devoted solely to his wife. People have done background searches on Ephesus and the early church in the Greco-Roman world and have determined that polygamy was not really a problem. There could have been isolated cases, of course, but that's probably not what they were talking about. Not their main concern is we need to have somebody who's not a polygamist be an elder. Certainly, you would have to have someone who's not a polygamist to be an elder, but that wasn't the problem for them. The problem was that there were a lot of men who slept around. There were a lot of men who would have a wife and also have servants or visit prostitutes or such, and this even crept into the church. Um, so this was not allowed. Now, if someone, let's say someone had been uh, a philanderer and before they got saved and then had a drastic change, devoted himself to his wife, then I would say that is a one woman kind of man. We're not going to concern ourselves with what happened before they got saved. But if he continues to act that way after he's saved, or if there's doubt as to whether he's saved in the first place, and um, he's been seen um, around the areas of brothels, then he wouldn't be blameless. Um, he's disqualified from being an elder. Um, I can't give an exact amount of time that would need to pass for that person to be, um, as uh, free from accusation and free from running around on his wife. But that may be a case by case basis and based on the culture. If that person is thought to be someone who runs around on his wife, or known to be someone who runs around on his wife, or has recently around on his wife, then he is not eligible to be an elder, or which is also an overseer. Um, in the modern days, if somebody goes to a strip club, they're not qualified to be an elder or an overseer. Um, they're now lusting after multiple women, and so they do not qualify to be an elder. Someone who's got a problem with pornography, that person is not qualified to be an elder or an overseer. I can't tell you how much time needs to pass by. It's probably going to have to be on a case by case basis. Um, But there's also the requirements of temperate. I think I've talked before here on the principle that runs through the book of or through the pastoral epistles, actually, of not being argumentative. Someone who is temperate is someone who will speak the truth in love. But if somebody wants to be, um, rude about something or blatantly disrespectful or tries to just argue, someone who's uh, a wise person, a good elder, is someone who's going to walk away from a situation before it becomes a full-blown argument. Sober-minded. Uh, it's not just straight out sober, but even sober-minded. But certainly this would include soberness, and we don't want someone who has a problem with drugs or alcohol to be an elder. Um, of good behavior, obviously, hospitable. You have to be someone who is happy to bring people into their home uh, to take care of people like a foot washer, like Jesus was, and of course able to teach. So we see we see this principle is what is something that is going to have to go on with the elders in Acts chapter 6, which is probably the precursor to the establishment of deacons. They chose 7 people to serve tables so that the apostles could devote themselves to prayer and to preaching of the word. So I would think that that would be a good example for the elders or the overseers to follow, is that they are going to um, spend a lot of their time in prayer and devotion to the word. And that's kind of the reason why we need deacons, is so that the elders don't have to be involved with things like facilities and um, the budget and all of these other things can be taken care of by deacons. So that way the elders or overseers don't have to worry about that. And so I would think that all elders should be doing at least some kind of teaching ministry in the church. You know, you may have a church where you've got one guy who's the pastor, and there's elders. Well, the good thing about that is that if that pastor should happen to start teaching heretical things, the elders could seat that pastor down. But they need to be also ready to get up there and preach. I mean, they should be preaching and teaching on a regular basis. You shouldn't have an elder who hasn't preached or taught anything, for months or even years, which I know that that's the case in today's church. That shouldn't be the place. If you don't want to teach, if you're not able to teach, maybe you should think about being a deacon instead of being an elder. So that way you can free up people to be able to teach. I find in a lot of churches today that elders are kind of doing the deacon's job. And I would call for us returning to this model that's in the Bible. Starting with verse 3, not given to wine. Already said not sober-minded, so here is specifically wine. Not violent. That's got to be pretty obvious. We saw temperate already. Not verse. Then we have not greedy for money, and money. This is. I think this is probably an important thing for this particular book. We see this money theme that runs through the pastoral epistles, but also through the New Testament in general. Money becomes a problem. In my opinion, the church at this time was going through a financial crisis. All right. I can imagine in the early church, maybe they had plenty of money. There were people who became believers and they sold their entire estates and they laid their money down at the feet of the apostles. And, I think maybe they were doing pretty well financially, and they were probably had a lot of people on the payroll. We're going to get to a point later where we're talking about the widows in First Timothy. I think that There was a lot of widows on the payroll, and for good reason too. They the church started as a Jewish movement, and the synagogue or the temple would have been essentially people's Social Security and Medicare, or the equivalent of that. They paid into that their whole life, and they would have been taken care of by that system as they got up into age, or if women were widowed, they would have been taken care of financially. But and the church assumed that role because once once they started kicking people out of the synagogue, once they started not allowing the Christians to have fellowship with the other Jews, it kind of became a separate movement, but they also lost all of their financial security that had come along with that. This is some kind of why Paul is in such um, a hurry, or so concerned about taking up a collection in various churches in the Hellenistic world that he can bring back to Jerusalem, because we've got to take care of those Christians who now do not have the ability. They had been depending on the hospitality of other Jews to take care of them, and now they don't have that ability. In some cases, it could have even been family members who had disowned them, children disowning their parents because now they're Christians, and they're believing in this Messiah, and the leadership in the Jewish leadership is saying Jesus isn't the Messiah. They're even claiming that Jesus is God, and the Jewish leadership is saying that's blasphemy, and they're kicked out. So that was the first thing, first money constraint. And then the second thing was, we believe that this letter being written to Timothy is happening at after the burning of Rome. And after the burning of Rome, Nero blamed that burning. It's probably him burning it himself, because he wanted to make room for a new palace, and the fire got out of control. But he's blaming it on the Christians. So the the temple and the synagogue turned against him. The government turned against him. Their neighbors are also turning against them because they don't want to be on the wrong side of the government, for one. But the other part is this religious difference. A lot of these, let's say, Gentile, because this early church is made up of Jews and Gentiles. A lot of these Gentile believers, uh, they used to worship all the various Roman gods, and the Christians were even accused of being atheists because they only worshiped one God. That's only one away from worshiping no gods at all. I mean, how irresponsible to just worship one God. This was like their boogeyman. If we don't worship all the gods, then terrible things are going to happen to society. So they were shunned by the synagogue, they were shunned by the government, they were shunned by their neighbors, and they're trying to support all of these people financially, and they're going to have to make hard decisions. I could think this situation uh, may have had parallels with, like, during the Great Depression, except it wasn't during the Great Depression. It wasn't just the Christians who were suffering, it was everyone. But certainly the Christians were also suffering during the Great Depression. They had to make decisions about what they're going to do with their money. Are they going to take care of people? Are they going to feed people? Um, you know, if something like this was happening today, churches would have to be making the decision: do we keep the electricity on? And this is probably a shock to most Americans, because that's something we can't even think about. How would a church get to a point where they couldn't even pay for the electricity? Well, that would be the equivalent of what's going on in this church. They're having to make those hard decisions because they're under a financial crisis. All right, so we can't have elders also greedy for money. Now this is the same book that's going to say the love of money is the root of all evil. Money is a big concern in the pastoral epistles, but also other places in the New Testament. It's a big deal in James. It's a big deal in Peter. It's a big deal in other Pauline epistles. Corinth. It's definitely a big deal there. So this is extremely important. The elder can't be there thinking that they're going to um, gain financial security by being an elder. Think about all the scandals with pastors and how they've not treated money properly, how they've flaunted wealth. There's a site called Preachers and Sneakers where it's disgusting how expensive their shoes are. Um, this is they should have never been pastors in the first place because they don't meet the qualifications of an elder or an overseer. They're greedy for money. It's kind of like we saw in the last chapter with these women who were coming to church with gold and pearls in their hair. They're flaunting their wealth. This is something that cannot be permitted to go on in the church. All right. But the same thing is, maybe pastors aren't even thinking about all these donations coming in. Maybe they're just thinking about their business opportunities that they have now that they've got this great standing in society because they can say, "Oh, I'm an elder at the church." Um, Anyone who's going to have that kind of an attitude, anyone who is fixated on money, it's not to say that you can't hire somebody or you can't bring someone on as an elder or an overseer just because they have a 401k and they have wealth. It's where is their heart? Where is their what kind of decisions do they make? Are they trying to seek money? Or are they trying to seek God's will? That's what it has to come down to. Next, gentle, not quarrelsome. Already kind of talked about this theme of not being argumentative in the pastoral epistles. Not covetousness. Well, that's one of the Ten Commandments right there. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Okay, I already said that's going to tie in with the end of this chapter, where Paul is calling the church essentially the household of God. If you can't run your own household, well, that's a sign that you're not going to do good with running God's household. And now, of course, people are going to say, well, wait a second. It could be, you know, sometimes somebody can do all the right things and their kids end up still turning out bad. And that's right. And it is unfortunate that we're going to still have to tell those people, I'm sorry, but you're not qualified to be an elder or you're not qualified to be an overseer because, your kid is the one who we know about that goes around breaking windows in the community. Yeah, get your house in order, get your affairs in order, and once sufficient amount of time has passed, then we'll think about making you an elder, assuming you fit all the other qualifications. In fact, if somebody could turn that around, turn their family around, that would be a great sign that they would do well as an elder. All right. Verse 6, not a novice, lest being puffed up with the pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. So you don't want someone who is new in the faith to be an overseer or an elder. Um, maturity comes with time. Also, you can kind of see how someone is doing in their Christian walk over time. So we want to give I can't tell you the exact amount of time, but we've got to give somebody time to be able to you know, become a strong Christian, be past that milk stage and get onto the meat stage and be a mature Christian before we're going to let that guy be an elder or an overseer. All right, that's going to be important because pride is, and the devil's just lurking all the time. Um, and the devil would love to deceive these people. And this is probably what Paul is saying, is that these false teachers, all of this, the false teachers are in the background of all of this. The reason why we need to appoint more elders is because probably those false teachers are elders, and they're going to have to be removed from office. Um, and they probably did have desire for money. They had the love of money, and that they were also teaching these maybe some kind of proto-Gnostic teaching, and they've fallen into the trap of the devil. Hey, there's this devil theme that runs through the pastoral epistles, and if this is some form of proto-Gnosticism in fourth century Gnosticism, which isn't the same as first century Gnosticism, but if there was some kind of a precursor to it, fourth century Gnosticism is going to see this distinction between the body and the spirit, or the physical realm and the spiritual realm. All right. And we're going to see Paul is continuously talking about physical and spiritual, which seems to indicate that this is the distinction that the false teachers were making. They're gonna think about people who they're trying to beat their bodies into submission because then they can have clarity of mind and be spiritual. Okay, well, it's all good to be spiritual, but have you forgotten that the demons are spirits? So when you talk about spiritual, what kind of spiritual are you talking about? Because we can't just have any kind of spiritual. And these false teachers have probably fallen into the devil's trap. And think of all the pastors, all the scandals again, and the pride, the falling for women, um, falling for money. All these things uh, happen today. And probably if there had been a plurality of elders, not putting that one guy, not giving that one guy so much power, it would have prevented a lot of this. In many of these cases, these people probably never qualified to be elders or overseers in the first place, but they were made pastors, and they were given, full access to the finances of the church, and they're up there preaching things like prosperity gospel, and telling you to donate even if you don't have the money in the bank. God's going to give it to you. God's going to help you pay off that credit card. Uh, you see that, flee, run. That guy should have never had so much power in the first place. It should have been spread out among elders, and perhaps he never qualified in the first place because perhaps he is someone who is covetous and greedy for money. All right, I'm preaching at you now. Verse 7, moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside. Once again, I'm saying what appearances matter. Appearances matter. What the non-believers see you do does matter. You always have to be thinking about your Christian testimony, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. And there it is. And this is almost certainly what the false teachers have fallen into. They've fallen into the snare of the devil. They've sought after spiritualism, and they got it. They got all kinds of spirits, all kinds of demonic spirits, who are elated that they're teaching these false teachings. Verse 8. Now we're going to talk about deacons. Likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued. And this word double-tongued, it's meaning not speaking out of both sides of your mouth, not telling one person one thing and another person another thing. But I think here even a little bit of this demonic picture is even in this word. That's Paul chose this word specifically because I think of that snake in Eden. He's already talked about Eden. And snakes are double-tongued. Not given to much wine, We're going to see that many of these qualifications here for the elder is going to be very similar to the qualifications for the deacons are going to be very similar to the qualifications for the elder overseer. Not greedy for money. There we go again. It's probably, maybe some of these false teachers were deacons and they were greedy for money. Um, and I think we're going to see here that it's possible that the deacon position is not a paid position, then, or at least it's one where you shouldn't be expecting to get paid for it. Verse 9, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. This goes to our theme. If you remember back in 1 Timothy 1:5, he talks about the pure heart, the good conscience, and the sincere faith. And this is part of the beautiful structure of the book of 1 Timothy, as he keeps on going back to these things. Um, so holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience, but also this word mystery is kind of a key word, especially in Paul. Um, and some people have said, well, Paul's using this word differently, and I'm going to disagree with that. So Paul uses the term mystery often to mean the gospel or an aspect of the gospel. And the common aspect of the gospel that he talks about is generally, he talks about how the Gentiles were included in the people of God. Now, this was taught in the Old Testament. I mean, Abraham was supposed to be a light to the nations. You see, when the people come out of Exodus, that a multitude comes with them. Here we have foreshadowing that there's going to be Gentiles who are the people of God. We see this in Jonah. He preaches in Nineveh, and the whole city um, repents and turns to God. We see this in Esther, where a multitude of people convert to Judaism at that time. These are all foreshadowing that there's going to be a multitude of Gentiles in the church age. The prophets, especially Isaiah and Jeremiah, they talk about future time. Zechariah, Amos, he talks about a future Gentile um, remnant or Gentiles going to Jerusalem and worshiping God there in the future, in the distant future. So these are things that what were talked about in Old Testament times, but maybe it wasn't thought of as relevant or obvious. And some of this is probably due to their eyes being blinded. So it can be spoken of as a mystery. We didn't really understand. Somebody who is living in Old Testament times didn't really see the whole church age coming. If you look at Daniel, he talks about the end times and he kind of skips over the church age. So there's definitely that aspect of the gospel which is a mystery. But sometimes mystery is just used as the whole gospel. I'm not going to turn there right now, but Romans 16:25, if you want to look it up, it's one place where this Greek word for mystery is used for the whole gospel. And I think that's the way it's being used here. However, he does talk about Gentile inclusion later towards the end of this chapter. So even here, he could be talking about the inclusion of the Gentiles being the aspect of the gospel that's the mystery, or just that he could be talking about both. Um, so holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. We're talking about the gospel message here. But let these also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. Now, if this is an unpaid position, like I think, or maybe it was a paid position, and now they've had to make those decisions, those tough decisions that they're not going to be able to pay deacons enough to survive or not pay them at all. But it still is kind of giving the insinuation that there's people enough a large labor pool of people who want to be deacons. And I think that again, financial crisis at this time. There's a lot of people who are out of work probably. There may be people fleeing Rome because that's where the worst persecution was from Nero. and come into Ephesus, and there's probably this influx of people there, and they're like, "Hey, we want to be deacons." And some of the people want to be deacons because they'll see it as like a status. Status was so important in the Greco-Roman world. And it's hard to change that mindset even after you've become a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. You know, it's part of the sanctification process. We'll eliminate that, but if your conscience is seared as a hot iron, like we'll see later in Timothy, then maybe that isn't working correctly. Okay, so here we have, and that's why he's just mentioned that pure conscience. If we've got this large labor pool, we've got, I mean, wish we had this problem right now. There's so many people like, oh yeah, please make me a deacon. Um, hey, that's a great problem to have. Okay, but we can't just make anybody a deacon. We have to think about their testimony. Again, like I said, it matters how things look. What do you say? Let these also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. One might also ask the question of why was it not listed as the elder overseers? How come they weren't told that they had to be tested? Now, some people say, well, it's just assumed, but I wouldn't assume that. Maybe if it was the other way around, if the first group was said they have to be tested, and then the second group that was just a shorter list of requirements, I might assume that, but I'm not going to assume that in this place. I think that these are deacons, are servers. They're ones who are waiting on tables. They're doing the facilities work. They're doing all those things that can free up, like in Acts 6, that can free up the overseers and elders, like the people in Acts 6 freed up the apostles, so that they can devote their time to prayer and teaching of the word. So all the work that needs to be done in the church is really falls into the position of the deacons. Okay, so in your church, if you have somebody who you've hired as like a children's Sunday school teacher, even if they aren't called a deacon, they're kind of doing what a deacon would do. A church treasurer may not be called, doesn't have the title of deacon, but that's kind of the fulfilling a part of the biblical role of what a deacon might do. They're ones who are serving and doing all of those things. Um, so that, once again, so that we can free up the elders and overseers for prayer and ministry of the word. All right. But apparently there's enough people that wanted to be deacons. Um, and they may have, even if they weren't getting paid, they could have received benefits, like they could have been providing meals for them in a time where, starvation was just a day or two away. That could have been huge. But definitely people were thinking, well, if I'm a deacon, if I've got notoriety, I've got status, then when things get really bad, looks like they're going to, then I'll be taken care of, you know. Um, and we don't want people becoming deacons for that reason. And I think what the testing is like a probationary type period where you bring on somebody as a deacon, and maybe or bring on someone as like maybe a deacon recruit, not a full-blown deacon. And if they can pass the probationary period, then we're going to make them a deacon. But if they come into work a couple times and they're drunk, well, I'm sorry. We told you this was going to be a probationary period. Maybe after a certain time of sitting this out, we'll try you again in a probationary period. But I'm sorry, we're gonna just have to say that you're not allowed to be a deacon at this time. And I think that like parachurch organizations should follow this, because if, let's say, your church runs a food bank, or multiple churches go together and start a food bank, everyone who works for that food bank needs to fit these qualifications as a deacon, because they're basically our deacons. And the biggest qualification is if they're holding fast the mystery of the faith and we're saying that's the gospel, they have to be saved. They have to show evidence of their salvation. If you're not saved and you don't show evidence of your salvation, you don't qualify to be a deacon. Um, so we look at a lot of these organizations that started out as Christian organizations, um, Red Cross, YMCA, we can go on and on and on. Should have never got to the point where they became uh, basically secular organizations. The church should have guarded that and made sure only people who are saved are working there. Okay. So if you're starting a parachurch organization, your workers in that organization are essentially deacons, and they need to follow this. They need to qualify. You can bring them on as in a probationary period, and let's see how you do. But if you're going to start violating these rules, then we're not going to make you an official deacon. All right, so let these first be tested, then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. Likewise, here I'm reading from the New King James Version. It says, likewise, their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Now, if you're not using the New King James Version, you may see that this says women instead of wives, or even you might have a note that says could be women deacons or deaconesses. And I actually think that that is more accurate. This word, gynekos, this Greek word, can mean woman or wife. Hebrew is the same way. They have a word that can mean woman or wife. But we don't have that in English. So it can cause a bit of confusion and cause difficulty for Bible translations. The New King James Bible translation is from 1982, if that helps put some things in perspective. There's reasons why I think that this is not talking about that the proper translation should be women, not wives, and is probably talking about deaconesses. And the first reason why I'd say this is talking about uh, women is because let's so we have um, no qualifications for overseers' wives. Why doesn't it say anything about overseers' wives? It would seem strange to suddenly talk about. So only the deacons' wives, just like I said, I believe only the deacons were tested in a probationary period. You wouldn't have someone be a probationary elder because for fear that they're teaching something from the pulpit that's not correct. You got to make sure that they're going to teach correctly before you even let them start. But deacons, you can let them start in a probationary period before um, under the guidance of deacons who have been there for a while. If there would have been qualifications for overseers' wives, if this is talking about deacons' wives, this word for women is the same word for women in verses 12 and 14, where we already talked about the qualification, what women, the role of women is in the church. It would seem strange to be talking about deacons and right in the middle of it, once again, talk about women in the church, especially when you already had a section talking about women in the church. Okay. So we're not talking about women in the church. We're talking about women deaconesses, or we can just say women deacons. And there's precedence too in Romans chapter 16 verse 1. We have Phoebe is called a deacon. Again, though, caution there because, like I said, the word deacon can just mean server, but I believe that that probably was an official position of deacon. In the qualifications of in the last chapter where we talked about what women and their role in the church, they couldn't be overseers of men. They weren't supposed to be teaching men. And a deacon is not an overseer position. Deacon is also not a teaching position. Now, you can be a teacher and be a deacon. Certainly, that was the case of Stephen the Martyr. He probably gave the best sermon ever in the Bible. You can be a teacher and be a deacon, but that's not one of the requirements. That's one of the requirements of the overseers. So it's quite possible to be a woman, not have authority over a man, not be teaching men, fit those qualifications from the last chapter, and still be an official deacon. In fact, there's probably a lot of things that women are going to do better than men, and they're probably going to be better in those deacon positions and certain deacon positions. Think of maybe like ministry to other women. Um, there's, you may not want men doing all of those things. And also in the Greek, there's no article on women. So in my New King James Version, it says, likewise their wives, but the word there is in Italian, in italics. When you see a word in italics in an English translation, that usually means that that word is not present in the Greek. So they've added that word. And, if that word was actually in the Greek, if it had said their women or the women even, I might have thought, hey, this is talking about the wives. But it just essentially says women, just women in the middle of a conversation about deacons. And so he's talking about general instructions for deacons. Then he has one verse that's talking about the women. Then the next verse is going to be talking about the male deacons. Let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own house as well. Obviously, that wouldn't be the case of the women. They wouldn't be husband of one wife. So you've got basic instructions for deacons, the case of women deacons, the case of male deacons. And then we go back to, for those who have served well as deacons, obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. What do we expect if we're going to volunteer to be a deacon? Well, we have a good standing and boldness in the faith in Christ Jesus. So we're not doing it to get a good standing before people. We're doing it to get a good standing before the Lord Jesus Christ. Essentially, you'll have rewards in heaven. If you're a deacon and you do serve well with the right attitude, you're going to have rewards in heaven. They may not be able to afford to pay you in this earth. I mean, I think if you become a deacon, you should have the attitude that I'm not expecting any pay for this. I think also if you're a church and you're bringing on deacons, you should probably strongly consider paying those deacons, or at least, providing some kind of benefit. After all, the worker is worthy of their wages. But then this works out perfect. Let's say you bring on some deacons and they're not expecting anything, and you give them health insurance. And they're like, wow, this is amazing. We're so happy that we got health insurance because they weren't expecting it. They had an attitude, we were going to do this just unto the Lord, and it can turn out to be a great thing. And if they want to, they can even turn it away. Oh, I've already got health insurance through something else, save that money for somebody. That's just a wonderful thing. If you become a deacon not expecting pay, and if you bring on deacons as a church expecting them to if you can swing it, pay them, then all of that compensation is just gravy in their book, and it just works out great. But if someone's coming into the position with this attitude that, oh, I'm not going to work for you unless you pay me, well, maybe we'll just pass there. Yeah. Verse 14, these things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly. But if I am delayed, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourselves in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. Okay, this is normal with Paul and Timothy, or Paul and some of his other co-workers, where he would send them places. He'd hope to get to them, and doesn't know if he's going to be able to to meet with them or not. Um, that's normal. But remember now, this letter is to Timothy, but we're expecting that the elders of the church, probably the whole congregation, and maybe even multiple congregations, are going to read this letter, and Paul knows that. So he's saying it to Timothy with the knowledge that, hey, everyone else is going to be seeing this too, and that's exactly what he wants, because he wants them to know that Timothy's got his full authority behind it. All right. And not just that Timothy should know how to conduct himself in the house of God, um, and that everybody should know how to conduct themselves in the house of God. And what is the house of God? The house of God is the church. But let's be careful. Don't think of this in terms of our modern notion of church being the building. This is the biblical notion of the church is the people of God. At our church, we have a sign um, from the inside as you're leaving the door. It says, "The church has left the building." And I love that sign because it keeps the focus on the fact that the people are the church. Well, we're also the house of God, and this Greek word can mean household as well. Um, as I said before, the reason why elders and deacons need to rule their own house as well because they're in leadership positions at the church. So that is God's household. How are you gonna do a good job leading God's household if you can't even lead your own household? Take Figure out how to get your own house in order first, and then apply to be an elder or a deacon in the church. And he also says it's the pillar and the ground of the truth. Um, so that this is either he's giving mixed metaphors, which is normal in the Bible. Um, the church of the living God, by the way, probably referencing like Old Testament notions of the living God, like in Deuteronomy, showing that this is a continuation. The church is a continuation of that same narrative that's been going on back in the Old Testament times, where they had the distinction between the living God and the false gods of the deities. In Ephesus, they worship Artemis of the Ephesians. He's the living God. He's not like Artemis, who's a fake god. But that this church is his church. And this church is also the pillar and ground of his truth. It's possible that this just mixed metaphors, but it's possible too that Paul may be insinuating that each one of us is like a pillar in God's household. So it's important for us all to work together and hold up that roof. And verse 16, and without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. And I just had mentioned that the god that was worshipped in Ephesus was Artemis. One of the seven wonders of the ancient world was the Temple of Artemis. Um, and one of the things that they would say at the festivals is they would elevate the mystery of Artemis. And now here Paul's talking about the mystery of godliness. It's probably a jab on that expression, but there's more. Because if you remember, in Acts 19:28, there was this big controversy about Artemis, and these people were afraid that they're going to lose money because nobody's going to be buying Artemis statues anymore. And they shouted, "Great is Artemis!" And here's Paul saying, "Great is the mystery of godliness." See, here is this jab on against the Artemis cult. It's and probably the we can add the satanic Artemis cult because of this theme of Satan and demons that's running through the pastoral epistles. And then he has another doxology. We saw a doxology earlier in the book of Timothy, and this is another great doxology. But this has been confusing to some people. First of all, the first word in my New King James Version says God, and that's probably not original. It's just later texts that have God. So probably a better translation would be who was manifested in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed up in the world, received up in glory. This may seem a little jarring to people because it's first appearance. It seems like it says that the preaching is going on before the ascension of Christ. Definitely, we are talking about Jesus here. He's assumed. Um, if mystery is the gospel, by the way, then the gospel is the word of God, and Jesus is the word of God. There you go. There you have it. This is about Jesus, but it seems to be out of order, right? Although people have pointed out, well, Jesus did tell the disciples to go and preach even prior to his death, burial, and resurrection. But I think the real answer to this is just how people are dividing up the stanzas. In my opinion, this should be three stanzas of two lines each, and then you have this movement from earth to heaven, heaven to earth, and then earth to heaven repeated. And definitely, this is if we again we're talking about Gnosticism. We're talking about how they believe that the physical realm is of no consequence and the spiritual realm is really important. Paul is again attacking that notion because he's talking about what Jesus did both in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm. I mean, there were even accusations that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross, which is completely nonsense. He died physically on that cross. He lived physically in the body, perfect body, and he really did die. His lifeless body sat in that tomb for 3 days, and of course the stone rolled away, and then he rose victorious, and everybody got to see him, and it just showed the power of God. It showed that everything that Jesus had taught was true. That's the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Okay. So Paul is saying, you know what? You're only concerned about the spiritual realm. Well, first of all, what spiritual realm are you talking about? Because what about demonic spirits here? But the second thing is we need to be concerned both about the physical realm and the spiritual realm, as Jesus was concerned both about the physical realm and the spiritual realm. So if we look at that first stanza, God was, or we'll say who, meaning Jesus, was manifested in the flesh, justified in the spirit. I know we have the incarnation and the life of Christ, and then the justification in the death of Christ, when his spirit was separated from his body. Then in the next stanza, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles. They must have been really concerned about angels if all they care about is the spiritual realm. Of course, we're reminding them that a lot of those spirits, a lot of those angels are fallen angels, and those are the ones who have entrapped you, by the way, but angels and Gentiles. So again, the mystery of the Gentiles. Um, but look at is we're concerned about the spiritual realm where the angels are, and we're concerned about the physical realm where we need to go out and evangelize to people. And Jesus was also concerned about both realms. Believed on in the world, received up in glory. Heavenly and spiritually concerns. Um, just want to God bless all of you and uh, ask that you'd consider placing your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, who died, was buried, and was raised. And until next time, I will see you. God bless.